Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Thailand, a country grieving for its dead king. But what will a full year of mourning mean for Southeast Asia's second largest economy, which has already been through so much political turmoil in the past decade? Also this week, the changing face of Middle East economy, Saudi Arabia making emerging market history with its first ever bond sale raising $17.5 billion. We'll take a look at why the world's largest oil producer needs to raise record amounts of debt. And guess who's having a very bad Brexit? Ireland. The Emerald Isles exporters are facing a crisis as sterling hits more fresh lows, and the indecision continues over what and when Brexit will actually be. So Thailand remains in mourning for its king, and by definition it will remain in official mourning for one full year. And although there are no questions over succession, King Bhumibol Adulyadej's death has raised many questions about Thailand's political and economic future. We have two reports for you this week. In a moment, Harry Fawcett reports on the legacy of the late king. But first, Wayne Hay in the capital Bangkok on how Thailand's economy navigates the next 12 months.
The start of a new week came just 3 days after the end of an era. The nation may be grieving, but it's open for business. In Bangkok, people made their way to work as usual, dressed mainly in black and white. A one-year official mourning period is underway for King Bhumibol Adulyadej.
Compared to what he did for our country for 70 years, 1 year for grieving is very reasonable.
We will definitely grieve for a long time. At least for me, I was born under his reign. I love him.
The stock exchange of Thailand slumped last week on the news the king's health was deteriorating. There were some fears his death could lead to a complete economic shutdown. The royal family is protected by strict laws designed to prevent criticism, but they also meant that before the king died, it was impossible to have any open discussions about the implications of his death on things like the economy. But after the king's death was announced and the Prime Minister gave assurances that the succession would go ahead as planned, the market rebounded.
For the economy, stock market and business sector, please don't stop. Don't make our country stagnate and unreliable. Don't panic buy or dump stock. I urge everybody to maintain our financial security.
Thailand's economy is traditionally resilient, but it's been struggling since a military coup in 2014. It's forecast to grow by just 3.1% this year, and the king's death may dampen that further.
If the reaction from the Thai people becomes, so jittery that we are looking more inward and we are not looking to become more sensible, for example, blocking foreign news channels and things like that, I think it would increase the uncertainties that would worry business people and investors.
There were also concerns the military government may delay returning Thailand to democratic rule following the king's passing. But it says an election will take place late next year as planned. It wants the country to mourn, but it's also trying to spread the news that a dark mood doesn't necessarily mean negative economic sentiment.
Imprinted on the mountain slopes above Chiang Mai are some of the most tangible legacies of Thailand's late king. After his death, these royal agriculture projects continue to give life to local hill tribes and to people such as Nang Yun, an ethnic Shan refugee from Myanmar.
I'm grieving along with the Thai people. The whole country is in grief. When I saw the news on television, I cried.
King Bhumibol was intimately involved in projects like this, convincing farmers to switch from opium to legal, sustainable crops. But as well as this royal legacy, this region is also home to a more recent legacy of political strife. It's a main centre of support for the Red Shirt movement, vehemently opposed to the military government that runs Thailand. In 2010, Red Shirt protesters took to the streets of Chiang Mai in opposition to the rival Yellow Shirts, often described as ultra-royalists. The streets now are peaceful. Dissent brings harsh punishment these days. On the day the king died, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha warned Thais to be on the lookout for anything that might lead to unrest. It's left leading red shirts feeling under extra scrutiny.
I believe that all 67 million Thais, we all love our king. No one more or less than the other. We just express ourselves in different ways. But if they don't treat the red shirts equally, and if we don't get justice, we'll continue to fight for it.
The red shirts were the popular force behind the former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. He was removed in a coup in 2006 by an establishment that saw him as a rival power base. General Prem Tinsulanond is a key member of that establishment. Until the Crown Prince takes the throne, Prem will act as regent. One long-time observer of Thai politics doesn't expect red shirt unrest, but says elections slated for next year could slip nonetheless.
In hindsight, we can say that the military, which took power in 2014, did so to ensure that they could safeguard the period of the succession and stabilize the monarchy from one sovereign to the next.
For now, the focus for millions of Thais is on mourning their revered king. The grief here is deep and personal. But long after the tears have dried, Thailand's sharp political divisions are destined to remain.
So let's bring together the politics and the economics of Thailand with our guest Ruben Mondajar. He's a professor at City University of Hong Kong. Ruben, can you first of all explain how a year of mourning works in Thailand? What does that actually mean? What will the impact be on the Thai economy? Because obviously it's not a complete year-long shutdown, but there are obviously going to be some rules and regulations for the next year.
Well, the first 30 days is the crucial one because that's the most immediate time in which the public and the entire nation is practically, they're required to grieve and to mourn. So in other words, there'll be a slowdown in commercial activities. So all of those, tourist spots, entertainment centers, movie houses, all of those major fun activities like parties, concerts, all those will be delayed or postponed or cancelled in the first 30 days. But after that, things will go back to normal. Thailand is a very practical place also. So after the first 30 days, I think we will see a recovery of the normal service industry points of Thailand, which is actually why the tourists go there. So tourists, remember, account for about 10% of their GDP.
Aside from the tourism, though, what about the bigger things, the investment in Thailand, foreign investment, people wanting to come there and work? Has that struggled in the last 2 years? Because again, I wonder how much does all of that political uncertainty put people off investing in Thailand?
That is the big question, because then we will have to see what will be the effect of the handover, of the change. Okay, the king died, and then the crown prince has asked that the coronation be postponed, and then there seems to be a power struggle going on. It is publicly known that the crown prince and the military, they're not in good terms or they don't like each other. And the same happens with the Privy Council, the royal household, and the prince. So it looks now that there is something happening. Now, the investors will take a look how that plays, because if you know that the irony is that the king was there when he ascended to the throne, there was a military dictatorship. And then the biggest irony is when he dies, again, Thailand was still in military dictatorship. So, I mean, it's such a pity because the king gave Thailand a very identifiable soul and brought Thailand to some progress. But then now it looks like that after all of this, they're still under military dictatorship. Now that will what the investors will take a look at, because stability is the key for investments.
Ruben Mondajar, pleasure to talk to you as always. Thank you so much for joining us. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, more and more of us are going to be living in cities that are actually becoming unlivable. A little later we'll find out why a lack of trees is a big part of the problem. But first to Saudi Arabia, which this past week held its first ever international bond sale, and it made history with a record $17.5 billion in debt raised in the offering. Why is this important? Well, because it signals change in the Gulf, a tangible sign that the oil boom days are in the past and that raising capital has to be done differently. That's why the world's largest oil producer turned to the debt markets to prop up its finances, remembering it's already laid out a big plan to diversify its economy away from oil. That fall in the prices has caused the Saudi budget deficit to balloon to its widest in more than 2 decades. It's not the only one taking this path. The Gulf states as a whole have been issuing bonds at their fastest pace ever this year. Let's go to London now and talk to Mark Ostwald. He's an emerging market strategist with ADM Investor Services International. And I wonder, Mark, if this is some sort of, well, watershed moment really for Saudi Arabia and indeed for the other Gulf states, you know, going to the bond markets to raise money after decades of making money from good old black gold and then sending it out to the rest of the world.
It certainly marks a huge sea change, but it's been flagged up for quite some time. When you're running a budget deficit of the size that they have been running, 15.9% last year, 13% this year, projected at 9.1% next year, you have 2 choices basically. You can basically erode the hugely accumulation of foreign exchange reserves, but after a time that becomes rather attritional. And given that there is very strong demand for emerging market debt, particularly higher rated, and Saudi Arabia at AA- or A- depending on which ratings agency, is certainly very highly rated, even though obviously the risks in terms of oil prices staying low for a more protracted period, and given a very high level of social expenditure as well as infrastructure expenditure, there's 2 sides of a coin, but it is definitely a sea change moment to have the Middle Eastern sovereign nations coming to the market, particularly the GCC ones, whereas before it was a question of them providing the world with excess petrodollars.
Okay, you've hit upon a point there which I was going to ask you about anyway. You described it as 2 sides of the coin. It surprises me that there would be this much interest in this Saudi offering when, as you say, the underlying fundamentals of the Saudi economy are still uncertain. You know, using this example, there are the low oil prices, there's the removal of the subsidies as well, the change in the economy. It's not exactly rock solid.
It's certainly not a rock solid economy, but perhaps one can make a comparison with the other. Previously this year we had a jumbo issue for Argentina. Obviously a completely different type of economy, one which has defaulted but deeply indebted. They bought an issue earlier in the year for 16.5 billion, so only just 1 billion short of the Saudi issue. But that also attracted enormous amount of interest, even a slightly larger book at 69 billion relative to the 67 billion of interest that there was in the Saudi issues. So it basically highlights the point that people are desperately searching for yield, and the downsides in terms of, well, the budget outlook doesn't look fantastic. You'd probably have a lot of people saying, ooh, I'm not particularly keen on this one, but it is the rarity value. This was, after all, a debut issue. In terms of Saudi Arabia's overall debt profile, it's still very low in relative terms to GDP. Nevertheless, it's increasing at quite a rapid rate. So the demand, as far as the huge book size relative to the issuance, is more a reflection of underlying financial market tensions. Also, definitely a factor playing a big part is the zero and negative interest rate policy which abounds across Europe, whereby you look at this issue at, say, 120 basis points over equivalent treasuries, and you say, well, that's a whole load better than negative interest rates, given that half the Eurozone interest rates bonds are below zero in return terms. This looks a lot more attractive. So it's what we call financial repression. In other words, people are forced to go into certain parts of the market, which perhaps in the past they wouldn't have done when, say, deposit rates were much higher or overall government bond yields in the G7 were much higher.
Mark, just finally, can you give me your overall view on the Saudi, I think they call it the Saudi national vision, the whole idea of economic diversification away from oil? do you believe they're on the right track? Because to me it feels like trying to turn around a big, well, pardon the pun, but an oil tanker really. You know, it's a slow move, it takes time and patience, and it's a whole mindset adjustment.
I think it's very complex. I mean, as an idea, as a proposal, I think it's very, very sound. However, delivering in terms of how it delivers infrastructure spending when they're cutting the budget at the moment, and they've been cutting a lot of infrastructure spending, the turnaround is going to take quite some time, and it will probably require a little bit of help from the oil sector. It's certainly a fantastic idea in terms of, amongst other things, the whole idea of moving to solar power generation for electricity seems to be a very sensible idea. But in terms of the diversification, there are a couple of other issues which are very, very important. First of all, it would be helpful for the Saudi budget if there was a rather more tranquil backdrop to what's going on in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is involved in a couple of the wars, which is extra expenditure. So that's money which has to be diverted away from developing the domestic economy. And that pushes the timeline in terms of what they want to do, in terms of changing the economy to be more reliant on the non-oil sector further out. So there is a delicate balance to be had here. I think the principles are okay, but it depends how much social unrest there's going to be with all the cutbacks that there's been.
Mark Ostwald there on the Saudi economy. Mark, thank you for your time. We're going to talk Brexit now, and one country not to forget in the EU Brexit disentanglement is Ireland. Government forecasters there have come to a conclusion: the harder the Brexit, the worse it is for Ireland. The collapse in the British currency has already hit its export revenues, and there could be worse to come. Goldman Sachs, for example, is predicting the British pound could fall further from its current 3-decade low. It seems the rough guide is that every 1% cut in UK growth hits Ireland by 0.3 to 0.4%, which would be telling for an economy which has seen a couple of years of recovery after exiting its international bailout scheme. Let's talk more about the possible impact on Ireland. Joining us from Dublin via Skype is John McGrain, Director General of the British-Irish Chamber of Commerce. John, I feel we've got two issues here. One is Brexit, which will happen at some point, though just how it happens we still don't really know. And then there are the currency problems. Talk me through what the impact in Ireland has been like with this crash of the British pound.
Yeah, so without being alarmist, Kamal, it is serious. Irish exporters have essentially taken a 17% currency depreciation on the chin as between their trade from euro to sterling. And for two countries that are economically joined at the hip, and Britain being Ireland's largest two-way trading partner, taking the greater part of our export trade for key industries like food and certain services like tourism, a 17% unilateral currency depreciation without any other change in the product proposition is pretty hard to take.
So in Ireland, is there even a necessity for some sort of government intervention to help the exporters out? You know, there is every indication the pound is going to further weaken, and you don't want to get into a sort of trade war.
So governments can't magic away a currency change on either side, and we don't see this as a currency war. We respect the democratic outcome of the UK referendum process, but we now have to deal with the absolute consequences, first of which and most severe of which is the currency depreciation. What government can do, and it's doing pretty well, is lending the non-price and non-financial supports it can into the export sector. It's doing things such as in its recent budget to ensure that other costs on business are not placed or imposed at this difficult time, that business can take time to reconfigure its model and be as competitive as it needs to be in these changed circumstances. And our marketing agencies and state enterprise support agencies are doing good work to do such things as to help our exporters develop additional markets in different jurisdictions. What we say as the British-Irish Chamber of Commerce, representing the interests of businesses focused on these two islands, is that there are opportunities indeed, counterintuitively, to do actually more business rather than less as between the two countries, so that businesses can, if you like, add volume as some sort of an antidote to the margin and unit value erosion that has happened in recent weeks.
John, if we extend our timeline a bit further and actually get into the Brexit scenario, That opens up a whole lot more issues, doesn't it? Border issues with Northern Ireland, business links with the UK, all these sorts of things. Again, tell me about the impact, especially on jobs, because I imagine that will worry a lot of Irish people.
Well, of course we are, but we're coming to this from a reasonably strong base, having previously gone through a very deep recession and a very stark and painful financial recovery. We have got our act together as a country, and that's why Ireland retains significant strengths and advantages. We're home to 9 out of 10 of the world's top medical devices companies, 9 out of 10 top pharma companies, 9 out of 10 born on the web companies, and that's just in the FDI international sector. We have some world-beating indigenous companies in food ingredients and other services along the way. So we're coming to this with reasonable strength. And we need all of that to get through what happens next. It is a challenge for our exporters, but bear in mind, we import 30% of our imports from the UK. So that has a food chain benefit in terms of our cost of living. So last month, the UK's cost of living officially went up and Ireland's cost of living officially went down. So that's the context. That said, there are very important issues around the securing of our future well-being in terms of continued uninterrupted market access between Ireland and the UK, continued uninterrupted free flow of our people, including across the dividing line formerly known as a border, which we do not want to see reimposed in any hard border way in a modern environment. And we have to work really well together with the UK and with our friends in the EU to broker a set of outcomes that brings about the least worst damage from these effects.
You know, it's a good reminder, isn't it, John? And I'm speaking here for our international audience who possibly hears about Google and Apple and the like setting up in Ireland and thinks, ooh, the Irish economy must be really strong. It is a good reminder that there is a very important indigenous economy, as you refer to it, which must survive.
Yeah, Irish indigenous firms now create more new jobs annually than our FDI firms, and we have wonderful FDI firms, but the Irish indigenous sector is very vibrant, and critically it's north, south, east and west. It's not concentrated in the major metropolitan cities, and it oftentimes, as in other jurisdictions, is run on a family business basis, giving high-grade employment in communities that might find that difficult to replace. So indigenous is very important, and we have highly competitive indigenous businesses who will adapt. There's no question they will adapt, but we need to set out our international stall to continue to work hard to attract the world's best foreign direct investors and to continue to support our indigenous firms as they adjust to these once-in-a-generation changes. We're confident that they will, but that's not to say we don't have to work really hard to make sure that they do.
John McGrain, great to talk to you this week. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Finally this week, trees, and a reminder of why we need them. Aside from the science, they emit oxygen, which is fairly important. There's the fact that urban sprawl means we'll need more of them. The United Nations already estimates by the middle of the century more than 70% of us will be living in cities full of pollution and overcrowding. Daniel Schweimler looks at the challenges faced in two of South America's biggest cities, Santiago and Buenos Aires.
More than half the world's population lives in cities. They're where the work and opportunities are, but also the energy consumption and the waste. The noise and overcrowding. Finding peace and tranquility can be a challenge.
Integration is important. We believe that parks are places where people from all over, from different social groups and different interests gather, which clearly aids their overall happiness.
Green open spaces in cities is just one of the topics being discussed this week in Quito at the 3rd Habitat Summit. Previously, the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development.
What happens is that the vegetation covers the dust, which causes pollution, and in the winter contributes to breathing illnesses. It also helps to lower the city temperature and criminal activity.
Cities cover just 2% of the world's landmass, but consume 60% of our energy and generate 70% of global waste. More than 800 million people live in slum conditions. We complain every day about traffic congestion, about pollution, drainage problems, building work, and much, much more. Here in Buenos Aires, in Santiago, Quito, New York, Lagos and Sydney. Diverse cities with common problems, coming together in Quito, hopefully for some shared solutions. The aim of the conference is to reinvigorate global political commitment to sustainable development of towns and cities, bringing together city planners, architects, politicians, environmentalists and residents from around the world.
We need to include more actors in planning our cities, not just architects and engineers, but ecologists too. We need all the disciplines to talk to one another so we understand the strategic role of vegetation in our cities.
The issues were first tackled at Habitat 1 in Vancouver 40 years ago, when just 38% of the world's population lived in cities. They keep growing faster than ever before, creating fresh problems, new challenges, and demanding innovative solutions.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet me at KamalAJE. Do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or just drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. And that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.